I never thought working in a morgue would change the way I see the world, or what lurks just beyond it. The moment I stepped inside that cold, silent place on my first night, something shifted. It wasn't just the chill in the air or the scent of antiseptic, it was a feeling. Like unseen eyes were already watching me, waiting. That night, I heard something I still can't explain, something that wasn't human. It wasn't the usual creaks or the hum of machines. It was something else. Something alive in a place where nothing should be. And that's when I realized, the morgue isn't just a room full of dead bodies. It's a crossroads between this world and the next. I want to share those stories, the ones that still haunt me, even years later. The shadow that passed just beyond the hallway light. The sudden cold touch on my arm when no one was there. The secret the morgue kept hidden in its walls. These aren't just ghost stories. These are the moments that made me question everything I thought I knew. What happens when the dead don't stay dead? What do you do when you're alone with them in the dark? You listen. You watch. And sometimes, you run. But I stayed. Because someone had to. And what I saw, heard, and felt on those nights will stay with me forever. The morgue was quieter than I ever imagined. It's one of those places where silence isn't peaceful, it's heavy, almost suffocating. On my very first night working there, I learned how loud silence can be. I remember walking through the metal doors for the first time. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above, casting sharp shadows across the cold, steel tables lined up like graves. The smell hit me immediately, an antiseptic mix with something else, something I couldn't quite place. It was like the air itself carried the weight of 1,000 untold stories. I was assigned to inventory the bodies that night, double-checking tags, and cleaning the tables. As I moved between rooms, the usual noises of a building, faint footsteps, distant humming, were absent. It felt like time had stopped. Then, just as I was about to finish, I heard it, a soft tapping sound. At first, I thought it was a rat or maybe a loose pipe. But the tapping kept getting louder, like someone was gently knocking on the wall behind me. I spun around fast, heart pounding, but there was nothing there. The walls were bare, cold concrete. Trying to calm myself, I brushed it off as nerves and kept working. But then the tapping came again, only this time it was closer. On the metal table beside me, a faint knocking echoed, 3 quick taps, then a pause, then 3 more. I froze. The logical part of my brain screamed for an explanation. Maybe a vibration from the building's air conditioning, or a tool knocking against metal. But the moment I moved to check, the sound stopped. The silence returned, thick and unnatural. That's when I noticed the temperature dropped. Not just a little chill, an intense cold that wrapped around me like an invisible hand. My breath came out in white puffs despite the room's controlled climate. I shivered, rubbing my arms, trying to shake off the feeling. I told myself it was just the morgue's cold environment, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I wasn't alone. Suddenly, from the far end of the room, I heard a faint whisper. It wasn't a word, just a soft breathy sound, like someone exhaling slowly. I turned sharply toward it, but again, no one was there. My heart hammered in my chest. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but something held me there. Curiosity? Fear? I don't know. What I do know is that the atmosphere thickened with an energy I'd never felt before. Minutes passed. The whispering stopped. The cold slowly faded. But the memory of that night didn't. I kept hearing those taps and whispers in my mind long after I left. After that night, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched whenever I returned to the morgue. It was like the walls themselves held on to those whispers, those taps, waiting for someone to listen. The next few nights were no different. Each time I walked those silent halls, the cold would creep in, an uninvited guest that refused to leave. Sometimes, I would catch flickers of movement out of the corner of my eye. Shadows darting just beyond the reach of the dim lights. One night, while I was double-checking paperwork, I heard a low, guttural sigh behind me. I whipped around, but again, there was nothing but empty air and rows of steel drawers holding the dead. I tried to tell myself it was just exhaustion playing tricks on me, but deep down, I was terrified. I started noticing other strange things. A faint smell of lilacs, even though the place was sterile. Cold spots that followed me down the hallways. The sudden feeling of someone standing too close, even when I was completely alone. Every night, the morgue seemed to breathe with a life of its own. It whispered secrets no one else could hear. It called to something buried deep in my mind. I realized that working there wasn't just about handling the dead, it was about facing the unknown. About staring into the darkness and hoping it didn't stare back. That first night taught me that silence could scream. And in those screams, I found something I could never unhear. After those first nights filled with cold touches and whispering sounds, I thought I'd become used to the morgue's eerie atmosphere. I was wrong. There was one experience that broke everything I thought I understood about that place, a moment that still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. It was late, around 2 a.m., a time when the morgue felt like it was holding its breath. The building was completely silent except for the faint hum of the ventilation system. I was on my usual rounds, checking the storage rooms where the bodies were kept before autopsy. The lights flickered intermittently, adding to the uneasy feeling pressing down on me. As I rounded a corner in a long, narrow hallway lined with cold steel doors, I caught movement from the corner of my eye. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, a shadow cast by the flickering bulbs. But when I looked directly at it, I froze. There was a figure standing at the far end of the hallway. Not quite human, not quite a shadow. It was tall, impossibly thin, and its edges blurred, like smoke drifting just beyond clarity. It didn't move, but I felt its gaze piercing right through me. My breath hitched, heart pounding. I wanted to call out, but my voice stuck in my throat. The hallway suddenly felt impossibly long, like I was staring down a tunnel with no end. I took a cautious step forward, and the figure seemed to dissolve into the darkness, disappearing as suddenly as it had appeared. I blinked, telling myself it was a hallucination or exhaustion. But then, the lights flickered again, and the air grew icy cold. My skin prickled as a whisper tickled my ear, so soft I almost didn't hear it. Leave. I spun around, but no one was there. Just empty hallway stretching into silence. That night, I didn't sleep. Every creak, every shadow, every gust of cold wind set my nerves on edge. I kept seeing that figure in my mind's eye, the blurred shape standing there, watching, waiting. Days passed, but I couldn't shake the feeling it was still there, lurking just beyond sight. I began to notice it wasn't confined to just one hallway. Sometimes, when I entered a room, the temperature would drop sharply, and I'd catch a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye. One evening, while reviewing paperwork, I glanced up to see the same shadow slip behind a door. I froze, heart racing. Gathering every ounce of courage, I followed. The door led to a small storage room, filled with old equipment and dusty boxes. The shadow was nowhere to be found. But then, the lights went out. I was plunged into darkness, my breath ragged in my chest. I fumbled for my phone, using its weak flashlight to scan the room. And that's when I saw it, writing on the wall, scratched deep into the peeling paint. Don't stay. The message wasn't there before. My hands trembled as I traced the letters. A warning. Or a plea. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me. I spun around, banging on it, but it wouldn't budge. The air grew frigid, and a low growl echoed through the small room. I was trapped. Minutes felt like hours as I pounded on the door, the shadow's presence pressing in around me. Then, as suddenly as it had started, everything stopped. The door creaked open on its own, and the lights flickered back on. I stumbled out, gasping for air, heart racing faster than ever before. That night changed everything. The morgue wasn't just a place of death, it was a place where something else lived. Something ancient, something angry. I never saw the shadow again after that night. But I could still feel it, watching me in the darkness, waiting for the next time I'd walk those empty halls. After the terrifying encounter with the shadow in the hallway, I thought things couldn't get any worse. I was wrong. The morgue has a way of breaking you down slowly, like a cold hand reaching out to pull you deeper into its secrets. It was a night like any other, but the air already felt heavier. I was alone, finishing up paperwork in the small office just off the main morgue room. The lights were dimmed low, the hum of the fluorescent bulbs the only sound. Suddenly, I felt it, an icy chill creeping up my spine. At first, I thought it was just the cold draft the morgue always had. But this was different. The temperature dropped sharply in a single spot beside me, like a frozen breath pressed against my skin. I turned slowly, half expecting to see the shadow from before lurking nearby. But there was nothing there, only the empty, sterile room. Then, without warning, I felt a touch. Not like a tap or a brush, but a deliberate, cold contact, like someone grabbing my arm with fingers made of ice. I jerked away, heart racing, and flicked on the overhead light. The sudden brightness revealed only my empty office. I sat back down, shaking, trying to convince myself it was a trick of the mind. But I couldn't ignore the sensation, like the cold hand had left a trace, a mark that burned deeper than any wound. Over the next few nights, the cold touch became a recurring nightmare. Sometimes it was brief, a quick brush as I passed through the morgue. Other times, it lingered longer, an icy grip on my wrist or shoulder, chilling me to the bone. I started to dread being alone. The morgue's coldness wasn't just physical, it was something else. Something alive. One night, while checking on a body before closing, the touch was stronger than ever. I was standing by one of the steel drawers when I felt cold fingers wrap tightly around my wrist. The shock sent a jolt through my body, nearly knocking me off balance. I looked down, but my wrist was bare, no marks, no scratches. Just a sudden, deep ache where the cold had touched me. I heard a whisper then, soft and distant, "Stay away." It wasn't a warning this time. It was a threat. I stumbled out of the morgue that night, my mind racing. I couldn't explain what was happening, but I knew the morgue wasn't just haunted, it was hostile. The next day, I did some research on the building's history. I found out that the morgue was built over an old burial ground, and before that, the land had a dark past. Stories of unrest, of spirits unwilling to rest. It made sense, the cold touch, the shadow, the whispers. They were all tied to something buried beneath the surface. I started to keep a journal, documenting every strange event. The cold touches, the voices, the unexplained movements. Writing it down helped me feel in control, like I was fighting back against the creeping darkness. But no matter how much I wrote, the morgue's grip only tightened. One night, the cold touch came with a new feeling, an overwhelming sadness, like the spirits trapped there weren't angry, but lost. I felt their pain, their loneliness seeping into my bones. It was heartbreaking. And terrifying. Because it meant they weren't just ghosts, they were souls caught between worlds, desperate for release. I realized then that the morgue wasn't just a place of death. It was a prison for those who couldn't move on. And I was trapped right alongside them. As the nights grew darker and colder, I became obsessed with uncovering the truth behind the morgue. Whatever haunted that place wasn't just restless, it had a secret. And I was determined to find it. One evening, after my shift ended, I stayed behind long after the others had left. The building felt different in the dead of night, the silence stretching heavy and thick. I had pulled a few old files from the dusty archive room, reports, blueprints, and newspaper clippings about the morgue's history. That's when I found something strange. A folded letter, yellowed with age, hidden inside a file labeled "Confidential." It wasn't signed, but the handwriting was shaky and hurried. The letter spoke of an incident that had been covered up, a fire decades ago that had destroyed part of the morgue's basement. Officially, no one was hurt. But the letter hinted otherwise. It mentioned bodies that had vanished, evidence that something in the basement was alive, and a warning to never go near the area. Curiosity got the better of me. I knew the morgue had a basement, but it was locked tight. I'd never been down there before. That night, I decided to find a way in. I slipped through the quiet halls, avoiding security cameras, my heart pounding. At the far end of the building, I found a heavy metal door with a rusted lock. It looked like it hadn't been opened in years. After a few moments of fumbling, I managed to pry it open with an old crowbar I found nearby. The stairs creaked as I descended into the darkness. The air grew colder, thicker, almost suffocating. At the bottom, the flashlight caught broken equipment, old shelving, and piles of dust. But then I saw it, a section of the wall, strangely covered in fresh scratches. I ran my fingers over the marks, and a sudden chill ran down my spine. It wasn't just scratches, it looked like claw marks. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me. My flashlight flickered as a cold wind swept through the basement. I heard a low growl, deep and guttural, echoing off the walls. I backed up slowly, heart racing. That's when I saw them, figures moving just beyond the reach of the light. Shadows shifting, twisting, and writhing like they were alive. I stumbled backward, feeling hands brush against me, cold, rough, desperate. The letter had been right. Something was trapped down here. Something angry. I managed to pry open the door and scrambled up the stairs, slamming it shut behind me. I stood there, panting, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. The morgue's secret wasn't just a hidden fire or missing bodies, it was something far worse. A dark presence lurking beneath, feeding on fear and sorrow. I realized then that I was dealing with forces I couldn't control, things beyond life and death. And no matter how much I wanted to leave it behind, the morgue wasn't done with me yet. After discovering the morgue's hidden basement and its restless shadows, I thought I had a handle on the darkness I was dealing with. But nothing prepared me for the night that pushed everything over the edge, a night where fear wasn't just a feeling, but a living, breathing force. It started like any other shift. The usual cold, the silence, the lingering weight of unseen eyes. I was going through paperwork and checking the refrigerated storage when the lights began to flicker. First softly, then violently, until the entire morgue was plunged into near darkness, lit only by the faint emergency bulbs. My phone's flashlight barely cut through the gloom as I made my way toward the hallways. That's when I heard it, deep, guttural growls echoing from the basement door. The same door I'd forced open days ago. My heart pounded, but I knew I had to see what was happening. I reached the door just as it burst open on its own. A cold wind blasted out, carrying whispers and faint cries that chilled me to my core. I wanted to run, but my feet felt rooted in place. From the darkness, figures began to emerge, twisted shapes, flickering between shadow and form. They moved with unnatural speed, their eyes glowing with a pale, sickly light. One stepped forward, towering and menacing. It stretched out a hand, its fingers elongated and jagged like broken glass. I felt an icy chill spread through my body where it pointed, as if its cold touch was freezing my very soul. Panic took over. I stumbled back, scrambling to close the door, but it slammed shut just as I reached it, trapping me inside the hallway. Suddenly, the lights snapped back on, but the figures didn't disappear. Instead, they retreated into the walls, the floors, the shadows themselves, like they were part of the building's dark veins. I ran through the halls, heart racing, the whispers growing louder, swirling around me like a storm. Doors slammed, and cold gusts slammed into my face, pushing me toward the exit. As I reached the front doors, the air shifted. The cold touch was back, this time gripping my wrist so tightly it felt like bone-crushing ice. I screamed and yanked free, breaking into a full sprint out of the building. Once outside, the air felt warmer, almost suffocating compared to the morgue's freezing cold. But the fear stayed with me, rooting deep in my chest. That night changed everything. The morgue wasn't just haunted, it was alive with something dark and dangerous, something that didn't want me there. For days after, I couldn't sleep. Every shadow in my home felt like the figures from the morgue waiting to crawl out. Every whisper in the silence felt like a warning. I tried telling myself it was all in my head. Exhaustion, stress, nightmares. But the cold touch, the shadow's warning, was real. And I could still feel it. I knew one thing for sure, I couldn't keep working there. But leaving wasn't that simple. The morgue had a grip on me now, a connection that wouldn't let go. And as much as I wanted to forget those nights, part of me was still drawn to the dark halls, waiting for the next terrifying secret to reveal itself. After that night, I never went back to the morgue. The cold touch, the shadows, the whispers, they haunted me far beyond those steel doors. Even now, years later, the memories crawl back in the quiet moments, reminding me that what I experienced wasn't just fear or imagination. I struggled to explain it to anyone. Friends and family thought I was just stressed, maybe caught up in some ghost story. But for me, it was real, the kind of real that leaves scars you can't see. I spent months trying to move on, to forget the cold grip on my wrist or the blurred shadow in the hallway. But the morgue had marked me. I could feel it in my dreams, silent rooms, flickering lights, and that chilling breath of cold against my skin. Sometimes, I wonder what happens to the souls trapped there. Were they angry? Lonely? Desperate for peace? I like to think I wasn't the only one who felt their pain. That maybe, in sharing my story, I'm giving them a voice. Working in that morgue taught me something I'll never forget: death isn't just the end of life, it's the beginning of a different kind of story. One where the lines between this world and the next blur, and sometimes, the dead reach out. If you've ever felt a cold touch when no one was there, or seen a shadow that didn't belong, maybe you've met the same restless spirits I did. And maybe, just maybe, the morgue isn't the only place where these stories unfold. Thank you for listening to my story. If you want to hear more strange and chilling tales, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more.